Okay, this is a lecture on justice and need. So justice is about what people are due. And some people have hypothesized that in part what people are due is what they need. Now that's a stronger claim than just saying meeting needs is good. We're not just saying it's merely good. It would be good if I had a larger paycheck. It would be good if I won the lottery. It would be good if many things happened. But that's not a question of justice. So for it to be a question of justice, it has to be stronger than just saying that it would be good for me if I received what I need. No, it's what I am due. For example, when we talk about children, it seems fairly clear that what they are due is what they need, is to have their needs met. They are not capable of having their needs met, and someone who neglected a child's real needs would be doing them an injustice, would be in some sense violating their rights. So trying to meet real needs is part of what it means to honor justice. Now, like reciprocity, there are other ways of incorporating need into a theory of justice than just honoring the value, right? Honoring the value here simply means meeting needs and telling people to meet needs, right? So one way that needs could figure into a theory of justice is simply to remind people periodically that they ought to meet needs, perhaps punish them if they don't meet needs, as in the case of child endangerment and child neglect. Another way that need could play a role in a theory of justice is when we evaluate theories of justice based on how well needs are met when we put that theory of justice into practice. Now, that's a different way of incorporating need into the theory of justice. Need is not a part of the theory itself, but it helps evaluate the theory. Societies where more needs are met are better than societies where fewer needs are met. So, coming back to a basic question, what is a need? What makes something a need rather than merely a strong desire? We're often loosely, when we say, I need that, when we see something that we really want, we're using the term need in a way that a lot of people find objectionable. I want to suggest two possible answers, or two plausible answers to what it means to need something. One which is very physicalist, and one which is more moralized. Apparently I don't have slides on physicalist and moralist answers, so let me just cover them really quickly. A physicalist answer would, as the name suggests, focus on the bare minimums to sustain life. Now, that's very contextual, right? So we're talking about things we always need, like air, water, shelter, and food. But we're also going to be saying that if I need something to survive, for example, if I need a heart transplant, without a heart transplant I would die, well then a heart transplant is a need that I have, right? And on the physicalist view. Moving beyond just the purely physical, we could also talk about psychological needs, right? Without which people might waste away, or kill themselves or deteriorate physically through psychosomatic effects. So the physicalist answer goes in some sense beyond the physical, but it reminds us that what it means to need something is tightly connected to the concept of survival. The moralized answer goes beyond this. The moralized answer says that what people need, in effect, is anything without which their rights could not be vindicated, right? So need here attaches to things that we are owed, or things that are due, or other things that we are due. So for example, when our free speech rights are being violated, we might say that our needs are not being met, not because we need free speech to survive physically, but because free speech might be a right that we are due. And similarly, if we cannot effectively participate in a society without a certain basic level of income, for example, not having that level of income would mean that our needs are not being met relative to the society in which we live. So the moralized answer, rather than tracking survival, is tracking something like, quote unquote, the correct theory of rights, whatever that theory of rights is. Having one's needs violated is not a matter of physical, so not only a matter of physical survival, because of course we have a right to physically survive, but it is tracking our rights more generally. Now, why might one be tempted to say that we have a duty to meet needs, or that perhaps people have a right to have their needs met? Well, there's a couple of options. Needs are a central interest that people have. This is the interest theory of rights. Right, so when things are very important to us as human beings, some people suggest that we should elevate that concern to a question of rights. And so when we have interests that are at the core of our well-being, then those things will be called needs, and though that might be slightly different for different people. You might say that needs are essential to welfare, or needing is tantamount to extreme disutility. This is sort of the utilitarian answer, right? We meet needs because needing is painful, because not having things is detrimental to our welfare. And so because morality on the utilitarian view requires us to maximize welfare, then we should try to meet needs. Another way to approach it is the opposite way from the utilitarian way, and that's the deontological way. We could say leaving people in need, not trying to meet needs, fails to respect the dignity of those persons. People who are needy are in some ways, I suppose, it's controversial, you might say less than fully human, or at least not living a fully human life, are not going to be respected in any way. And so in order for people to achieve the status of a dignified human existence, they have to have their needs met. And finally, one might take a virtue ethics approach to say that ignoring neediness is to demonstrate a vicious character, right? People who walk by while people are starving in the streets and don't try to help is to show bad character. And of course, we have duties to cultivate our characters and to become good people. As a result, we should try to meet needs, in part because we have a duty to be virtuous. Right? So these are all different ways in which we could justify the notion of needs having something to do with justice. Now, so far we haven't said anything about the government or the state or how we politicize this question. Like all questions of political philosophy, one has to pay attention to how institutionalizing a moral principle like meeting needs affects human beings, the way that human beings are. Right? So when we have a theory of justice that says reciprocity is important, doesn't mean automatically that the state is going to come in to make you pay your debts or make you repay favors that you have been the beneficiary of. Equality doesn't always imply equalization. We talked about that a little bit when we talked about egalitarianism. The fact that more equality would be better doesn't automatically imply that the state should come in and equalize things. And desert doesn't always justify coerced meritocracy. So we might, even though we might say it's unjust for, say, a CEO to hire his nephew for a job or an internship at the company over somebody who's more qualified or more deserving, one might not favor laws to prohibit the CEO from doing that. There might be other costs of doing that. So once again, the fact that we've established that something grounds a claim of justice doesn't yet tell us what the government should do. That's going to be a separate argument. So to say that I should get what I need doesn't yet point to any person or entity who should fulfill this need, right? I talked about children being an obvious case where what they are due as a matter of justice is what they need. Children should get what they need, but it doesn't automatically imply that children should get what they need from their government, right? It seems that parents have been placed in a special position with respect to their children, and that at the end of the day, they are the ones who have a duty to meet the needs from their children. Extended families might have slightly looser duties, and society at large probably have looser duties still. Um, workers. Workers should get part of what they need from their employers, right? You need wages in order to live. Most of us do. Um, but that doesn't mean we should get them for free, right? It means that employers should, meet part of our needs. Not because we need it, but because we have earned it. And of course, when it comes to less tangible, less physicalist aspects of needs, spouses and families should probably play a role in satisfying our emotional needs, without which we couldn't live well, or without which we couldn't live at all, maybe. So governments are obviously going to play some role here, but it's not immediately obvious what role the government needs to be playing. One way governments could make sure that we get what we need is not by giving it to us or serving as a needs meter of last resort, if you will, but in making sure that these other areas of life, family life, employment, and so on and so forth, can function reasonably well. Because if the economy is functioning reasonably well, and if our social structures and our family structures are functioning reasonably well, then many, if not most, of our needs will end up being met without the government having to dole out a single dollar to meet needs. So, need can play, again, a variety of roles in the way we think about social institutions. And finally, well, maybe not finally, but one of the final points, to care about need is not necessarily to care about people getting what they need for free. I mean, often when we point to extreme cases of need, we're pointing to people who are in desperate circumstances, who have exhausted all available opportunities, or who are simply too physically, emotionally, or mentally disabled to meet their own needs. And so we say, well, look, the government needs to do something about this, or someone needs to do something about this. But that being said, in most cases, in ordinary cases, in many cases, we don't need to be committed to people receiving what they need for free, right? We can acknowledge that usually, most of the time, our needs are going to be met by our participation in reciprocal relationships, in cooperative endeavors like families, like friendships, communities, as well as our businesses. So need seems to me on grounds of social justice is going to be most obviously a criterion for the evaluation of the basic structure of society. Basic structures that tend to be systematic, basic structures here simply means basic institutions like the family and the economy and civil society and churches and things like that. Basic structures of society that tend to systematically fail to fulfill needs are going to be clearly more unjust than those structures that meet them. The alternative, I think, is that a society whose rules and institutions tends to produce systematic neediness can be a just society, and that just seems implausible. Schmitz has an interesting phrase in his book on passing the test of self-inspection, right? And he says in particular that distributing according to need must pass the test of self-inspection. This is one of those nice little sentences that I like to try to unpack the meaning of. What does that mean? What does it mean that need has to pass the test of self-inspection? Well, for Schmitz, if we care about need, if we really care, then we want social structures to allow and encourage people to do what works in terms of meeting needs. Societies that effectively meet needs, historically speaking, Schmitz says, have always been those that empower and reward exercises of productive capacities by virtue of which people meet needs. So meeting needs for Schmitz, society, at a societal level or over the long run, is a matter of production. Right? We want to figure out what produces stuff. The reason we want to encourage the producing of stuff is that once we've produced the stuff, presumably there's a higher likelihood that people will be able to get their hands on it and that needs will be met. So he thinks that empowering and rewarding exercises of productive capacities are what, in the long run, is going to help us meet needs. And he says even if meeting needs were all that mattered, if the only thing we cared about was meeting needs, we still would not want to detach the awarding of paychecks, for example, from what actually meets needs, namely productive work. So even if need were the only strands in our theory of justice, we didn't care about desert, we did not care about equality, we did not care about reciprocity, we still would presumably want people to be rewarded based on something like their contributions, because that's what it seems to Schmitz, that's what incentivizes people to work hard and produce lots of stuff. Because again, once it's produced, it can be distributed. But if nobody has an incentive to produce it and nobody ends up producing it, a lot of needs may end up going unmet. He also notes that if you want to elicit speed in a sprint, you reward speed. But if you want to reward need, that is to say, if you want to reward the manifestation of need, you are setting up a kind of bad incentive system, right? If you reward need, what you're saying is that if your people who demonstrate neediness can claim to have their needs met, it seems that you are encouraging people to manifest neediness. So he wants to note that in many contexts, distributing according to need does not result in people getting what they need. Quite the opposite. It results in lots of neediness.